My name is Lucy Gill, and I never thought Christmas could feel so hollow. But that year when I was 34, lying in a hospital bed while the world outside jingled and laughed, it did. The sterile white walls, the hum of the monitors, the faint scent of antiseptic, it all made a cruel kind of theater for a holiday I couldn't reach. I had been admitted 3 days earlier, after a severe allergic reaction left me swollen, dizzy, and itching under my skin like it wanted to crawl out. The doctor had reassured me it wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough that they insisted I stay until every test came back clean. Normally I hated hospitals, but this time the thought of leaving my son, Evan, at home on Christmas without me made it worse. Evan was 10, a boy old enough to notice that life sometimes bends in cruel directions, but young enough that he still believed in Santa, magic, and Christmas miracles. I had tried to prepare him. I'd left a detailed schedule with the nanny. Pancakes in the morning, a marathon of his favorite movies, a little gift exchange with family via Zoom. I even helped him pack a small bag of presents for my parents, my siblings, and their kids. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful little things, wrapped in red paper that crinkled no matter how carefully he smoothed it, each tag written in his crooked, determined handwriting. That Christmas morning the nanny called. Her voice wasn't rushed or frantic. It was measured, but something underneath it made my stomach knot. "Lucy," she said slowly, "there's been a problem." I assumed she meant Evan had spilled something, tripped, or gotten sick. But no. He had dressed himself, put on the green Christmas sweater he wore only once a year, and carefully carried his bag of gifts to my parents' house just a few blocks away. He was excited. He had been counting down the days, saving his allowance, and making sure every gift felt personal. But my mother had opened the door and, looking at a 10-year-old standing in the freezing cold with a bag of gifts, said, "This year is just for family." And she shut the door. I asked the nanny to repeat herself. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe my mother had said something else, or maybe the door had closed by accident. But no. Evan had stood there long enough for the rejection to land, turned silently, and walked back to the car, gripping the gift bag against his chest. Not a tear. Not a question. Just confusion and the faintest trace of hurt in his eyes. When he arrived at my hospital room 10 minutes later, his cheeks pink from the cold, he handed me the bag. "Grandma didn't want company," he said quietly. The weight of it settled in my chest like ice. Not the dramatic kind of anger people expect from family betrayal, but quiet, deep, suffocating. I didn't call my parents. I didn't cry. I just sat there watching Evan carefully play a game on my tablet, pretending the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. 3 hours later, I found myself staring at my phone. I typed a single message to my brother Mark. "I won't be covering your rent anymore." Nothing more. No explanation, no warning. Then I set the phone down. I didn't answer the calls that came in moments later. A month earlier, Mark had been in trouble. Behind on rent, panicking about Christmas. My parents had pleaded with me to help him. I had agreed, paid the bills, set up automatic payments, all under the guise of keeping the family together. I hadn't realized until that Christmas morning that my parents had been teaching me a pattern, that my resources and my child's innocence were always available for their convenience, never to be protected. Evan sat beside me, quietly observing, holding the bag of gifts close. The room felt strangely silent despite the beeping of monitors, like the world had paused to watch us reckon with betrayal. For him, this wasn't about money or family politics. It was about being seen, being included, being loved. And for the first time that day, I realized I needed to show him that, even if the people who were supposed to love him most couldn't. I pressed the nurse call button. "I want to leave," I said when she arrived. She hesitated, glanced at the forms, and then nodded. Yes, I was sure. Yes, I was done letting my parents' version of family dictate my life. By the time we walked out of that hospital, Evan clutching his bag of untouched gifts, I had made a decision. We weren't going home, not yet. Not to them. The drive was quiet. Evan stared out the window, watching the Christmas decorations on the houses we passed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He just sat steady and thoughtful, a 10-year-old already learning the harsh lessons that adults sometimes fail to teach. I didn't tell him what I was about to do. Not yet. I wasn't even sure myself. But I knew this, whatever our family had been, It no longer included the people who slammed a door on a child in the name of tradition. We pulled up across the street from my parents' house, and I froze for a moment, watching. From the outside, the house looked perfect for Christmas, the kind of over-the-top magazine cover holiday scene that people admire from their cars. Twinkling lights, oversized inflatable decorations, candy canes lining the walk, even a garland looped with ribbons over the porch. On any other day, I might have admired it myself. But not today. Evan glanced at me, holding the gift bag carefully between his knees, as if it were fragile. "Are we going in?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Just for a minute." He nodded, eyes still wide and thoughtful. There was no anger, no shouting. Just a quiet curiosity, as if he wanted to understand why the world sometimes let people be cruel. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, Evan following with careful steps, his small hands clutching the bag like a shield. The door opened before we could knock, my mother's smile stretching across her face as if expecting someone else entirely. That smile faltered instantly when she saw us. Her eyes flicked to Evan, then back to me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly unprepared for a direct confrontation. "We need to talk," I said calmly, moving past her. Evan hesitated for just a moment at the threshold. "Just inside," I whispered. "We won't be long." The living room was chaos. Wrapping paper ripped and scattered across the floor, half-eaten cookies on plates, empty cups of cocoa, and toys strewn like confetti from a long-forgotten celebration. The laughter of my siblings' children bounced down the hall, sharp and high-pitched, a stark contrast to the weight in the room. My father appeared from the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, looking surprised, then quickly irritated. "Lucy, what's going on?" he asked. "Why did you tell my son to go home this morning?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. My mother's face hardened, a flicker of discomfort passing before she masked it. "We didn't know he was coming. We were keeping things small this year." "Just family," she said, sharp and clipped. "Small," I echoed, glancing toward the hallway. "Are Mark's in-laws family?" She looked away. My father let out a tired sigh, trying to mediate. "Lucy, he shouldn't have just shown up. It put us in an awkward position." "He's 10, I said. "He showed up with gifts. He waited in the cold. And you shut the door in his face." My mother waved a hand dismissively. "You're exaggerating. We were trying to avoid hurting anyone. It wasn't personal." "Not personal?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You slammed a door in a child's face. That isn't accidental. That isn't small. That's personal." Her eyes narrowed. "You always make things bigger than they are. You twist situations to make yourself the victim." I swallowed the surge of anger and looked at Evan, standing quietly beside me, still holding the bag. His face was calm, but I could see the confusion and disappointment lingering there. He didn't ask questions, didn't complain, didn't cry. He just waited. And that waiting was unbearable. "Yes," I said finally. "I am the victim here. My son is the victim. And I will not let this pass as normal." My father stepped forward again, trying to regain control. "Lucy, have you thought this through? This could create problems with Mark's family. Think about the consequences." "I understand perfectly," I said. "Mark's problems do not justify this. They never have. And they never will." Mark walked in at that moment, jaw tight, shoulders tense, already winding up for confrontation. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded. "How could you do this on Christmas?" I waited for him to ask about Evan. He didn't. Instead, it was all about him, his entitlement, his financial comfort, his inconvenience. The clarity of it hit me like a blow. My family prioritized their convenience over a child's feelings, over kindness, over decency. My mother's voice cut through the tension, sharp and rehearsed. "Family supports each other," she said, as if speaking slowly would make it true. "You help when someone needs it. We've always helped you." I looked directly at her. "Really?" I said. "Because leaving a 10-year-old standing outside in the cold is your idea of support?" She scoffed. "You're being dramatic, Lucy. You always do this. You exaggerate and twist things." I turned and saw Evan still holding the bag, small and quiet. His shoulders were hunched slightly, not from fear, but from trying to make himself smaller, invisible. My heart clenched. "That was it," I said, finally, feeling a resolve settle over me. We're done here. I knelt in front of Evan. Ready to go? He nodded. Slowly, carefully, we left the house without another word. I could feel the anger, the disappointment, the coldness radiating behind us, but it didn't touch me anymore. Not like it used to. Once in the car, Evan asked quietly, "Do they still count as our family?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We're still a family," I said gently. "Just us. And that's enough." The rest of the drive was quiet. He stared out the window, lost in thought, clutching the gift bag like it was the most important thing in the world. And in that quiet, I realized something essential. My definition of family had changed. From now on, it would be about love, protection, and respect, not obligation, manipulation, or who got to slam doors. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the quiet of our small street felt like a bomb. Evan carried the gift bag carefully into the house, setting it gently on the kitchen counter as if it were a fragile artifact. I followed, closing the door behind us and letting the silence settle like a shield. For the first time that day, we were away from the chaos, the cold, the judgment of people who claimed to care. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table and stared at the laptop. The bag sat beside me untouched, the little tags Evan had written peeking out. Socks for my dad. A candle for my mother. Tiny toys for my cousins. Every detail a testament to his thoughtfulness, to the care he'd put into being part of a family that hadn't wanted him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years trying to keep this family together, filling in where my brother faltered, covering mistakes, making up for irresponsibility. And yet, when it came to a child, a boy who had done nothing but try to bring joy, they closed the door. Literally. Emotionally. Completely. I picked up my phone. The message to Mark still stared at me from the draft folder. I won't be covering Mark's rent anymore. I hadn't sent it yet, but now, with Evan quietly arranging the gifts on the counter, I pressed send. Immediately, my phone buzzed with calls and texts. Mark, my mother, my father, each one more frantic than the last. I ignored them. Months of frustration came into sharp focus. Mark had repeatedly fallen behind on rent, and every time I had stepped in, the bills, the groceries, the car repairs, it had all fallen to me, supposedly out of love, but more often out of expectation. My parents had reinforced it. "You're holding the family together," they'd said. Every dollar I sent, every favor I granted, it had become an unspoken contract I never agreed to. I'd been their buffer, their bailout, their peacekeeper. And now, a 10-year-old's simple gesture of love had been rejected by the very people who should have been protecting him. Evan's quiet presence beside me pulled me back. He was arranging the gifts carefully, straightening the red paper, checking the little tags. "Mom," he asked softly, "are they still our family?" I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We are," I said. "Just us, Evan. That's enough. Always enough." He nodded, but I could see the confusion still there. The tiny crack of hurt I couldn't entirely mend with words. I realized then that family wasn't about blood or holidays or who lived closest. Family was the people who saw you, protected you, and made you feel safe. And if my parents couldn't do that, I would. I opened my spreadsheet. It had been months since I'd last tallied the totals, but now I needed a clear picture. Every dollar sent to Mark, every utility bill covered, every temporary bailout. It all added up to more than I wanted to admit. Over $18,000 in 2 years. Not counting the repairs on my SUV, which had been another lesson in unspoken expectation and emotional leverage. They had used their past generosity as a weapon, reminding me again and again that I owed them, that everything I did for Evan was trivial compared to the favors they'd granted. I took a deep breath and logged into my bank account. With deliberate care, I transferred the $3,000 for the transmission repair back to them. In the memo line, I typed simply, "for the transmission." No explanation. No apology. No emotional leverage. Just a transaction. The silence that followed was deafening. I expected anger, confrontation, a flurry of calls. But there was nothing. That quiet made me uneasy. Silence, I realized, was them recalibrating, figuring out their next move. 3 days later, my mother finally texted. "We received the money. Thank you." No mention of Evan. No acknowledgement of the door slammed, the gifts rejected, the hurt caused. Just a cold confirmation that the transaction was complete. And then the inevitable. Are you planning to resume Mark's rent next month? Or is this still about what happened on Christmas? Still about Christmas? I whispered to myself, staring at the screen, as if the rejection of a child, the cold dismissal of love, could be brushed aside as a misunderstanding. That night, Evan and I made dinner together. Pancakes shaped like snowmen, chocolate dripping onto the counter, laughter echoing in our small kitchen. We weren't visiting anyone. We weren't being told what we owed or what was expected of us. We were simply home together, safe. And for the first time that week, I felt something like relief. The next morning, I canceled Mark's automatic rent payment and removed my parents' access from every account. Streaming services, grocery apps, even cloud storage they had been quietly using. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because every connection felt like a tether, a reminder of control and expectation. I needed to reclaim space for Evan, for me, for the small family we were building together. That evening, after Evan had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table again. The gift bag remained untouched, a symbol of innocence preserved despite cruelty. I sent one final message to my parents. I will not be providing any more financial support. I've paid back what I owed. Do not contact me for money again. If Evan isn't welcome in your home, neither am I. And then I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, the silence was mine. And it was good. The next few days were strange. Almost eerily quiet. No frantic phone calls, no guilt-laden messages piling up in my inbox. The absence of my parents' voices, usually so persistent and controlling, felt unnatural at first, as if I was waiting for a siren that never came. But slowly the quiet started to feel like freedom. Evan and I settled into our own rhythm. He spent mornings helping me in the kitchen, afternoons lost in board games, and evenings reading by the Christmas tree we'd decorated together. No one barged in to critique, to manipulate, to make us feel small. It was peaceful. He had never seen the house this calm, and I could see him relaxing, letting go of the tension that had built up over years of knowing that sometimes, the people who were supposed to love you the most didn't. It was in those quiet moments that I started to think clearly. Past the shock of that Christmas morning, my parents had always leveraged my kindness, my sense of responsibility, to manipulate not only me but also the rest of the family. Mark had been the most obvious beneficiary, constantly behind on rent, struggling with his own finances, yet I was the one called upon to bail him out. Every month, every crisis, every emergency had been reinforced with a subtle but unmistakable message. This is what family does. You owe it. You are responsible. But now, faced with their rejection of Evan, it all became painfully clear. Their love had always been conditional, transactional. It was never about seeing us, never about protecting or nurturing my child. It was about control, about making sure that they could dictate the terms of our loyalty, our generosity, our very lives. 3 days after sending the final message, my mother left a long voicemail. I didn't listen immediately. I did the dishes, helped Evan with his homework, cooked dinner. I let the message sit, letting myself feel the calm before the storm I assumed it would bring. Eventually I pressed play. Her voice was carefully measured, the kind of tone that tries to sound calm while maintaining dominance. She said I needed to calm down, that mistakes had been made, that things had gotten out of hand. Then came the line I knew would appear. We've done a lot for you. There was still no mention of Evan, no acknowledgement of the door slammed in my son's face, no recognition of the gifts he had carefully prepared. Just a reminder of their own generosity, framed as a debt I supposedly owed them. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her voicemail only confirmed what I had already known. My parents had never truly considered Evan part of their equation, and if they still couldn't see it now, they never would. That evening, Evan and I made frozen waffles for dinner and redecorated the small Christmas tree in our living room just for fun. He carefully rearranged ornaments, stepping back every few minutes to make sure everything looked right. The house was ours. The space was ours. The joy was ours. Do you think we'll still see Grandma and Grandpa? Evan asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment, watching him adjust a red ornament until it was perfectly straight. Maybe not, I said honestly. But that's okay. We have each other, and that's what matters. He shrugged, then smiled faintly. I like it better here anyway. And I did too. Over the next few days, I monitored my bank accounts, double-checking automatic payments and removing any lingering access my parents might have had. Streaming services, cloud storage, even the grocery app my mother loved, it all had to go. I wasn't being petty. I was reclaiming boundaries that had been violated for too long. Each click, each removal was a small act of reclaiming control over my life, my money, and my son's well-being. Then came Mark. His messages, initially frantic and pleading, became more accusatory. "You're turning everyone against me. You're selfish. You're ruining our lives." Each one was a reminder of how my family had weaponized obligation and guilt for years. But now I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded his messages to his wife with a single line. "I'm sorry you're in this, but I'm out for good." Her reply, a simple thumbs up, was all the validation I needed. I had protected Evan. I had drawn the line. I had chosen him, and through that choice I realized something crucial. Sometimes protecting your child means cutting ties with the people who claim to be family but are anything but. The quiet that followed felt unnatural at first, but soon it became healing. No calls, no guilt trips, no chaos. Only Evan and me, together, safe and finally able to breathe without tension pressing down on us from the weight of other people's expectations. That month I realized what true Christmas meant for me. Not the decorations, the gifts, or even the traditions. It was the moments we created for ourselves, the love we gave each other freely, and the peace we carved out of a world that had tried to teach us otherwise. The following week brought the expected ripple effects. Mark, predictably, tried again, sending a series of messages full of blame and manipulation. "You're making this about yourself. You're tearing the family apart. Think about what you're doing to the kids." I read each one carefully, my finger hovering over the reply button, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence said more than words ever could. Evan noticed my focus, but he didn't ask questions right away. Children are perceptive. They know when something big has shifted. On Thursday morning, as we made hot chocolate, he finally spoke. "Mom, will they be mad forever?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if he didn't want the answer to hurt him more than it already had. I set down the mug and looked at him. "Maybe," I said honestly. "Some people only see what they want to see. They can't always understand when they're wrong. But that doesn't change us. It doesn't change our family." He thought about it for a long moment, then shrugged. "I like our family." That was enough for me. It was everything. My son's trust, his understanding, and the small, fierce pride he carried for our little unit. I realized then that protecting him meant more than words or rules. It meant standing firm against anyone who would try to diminish him, even if it was his grandparents. By the weekend, Mark had escalated, calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails filled with anger and entitlement. He reminded me of promises I had made years ago, of times I had stepped in, of how our parents had helped me in the past. But past favors didn't give anyone the right to manipulate the present. I forwarded all his calls to voicemail and kept a record of every interaction. Documentation, I realized, was power. Not power to punish, but power to protect myself and Evan. The hardest part wasn't Mark. It was my parents. Their attempts at reconciliation were predictable. A voicemail here, a text there, each phrased as concern while wrapped in subtle coercion. "We're disappointed in how you handled things. You're overreacting. You're using Evan as a weapon." All of it was designed to make me doubt my choices, to pressure me into compliance. But I had seen their game clearly now. One afternoon, as Evan built a fort out of pillows in the living room, I realized how different our life felt. There was space to breathe, to laugh, to make mistakes without judgment or manipulation. Every call I ignored, every account I restricted, every boundary I set was like reinforcing the walls of that fort, safe, comforting, entirely ours. I spent hours going through old bills, receipts, and transfers. Every dollar I had spent bailing out Mark, covering his rent, or handling other emergencies was now accounted for. $18,000 over 2 years, plus another $3,000 for the SUV transmission. Seeing the numbers laid out so clearly made the manipulation tangible, no longer abstract. And as I closed the laptop, I made a decision. No more. No more money, no more guilt. No more obligations masquerading as family duty. That night, Evan and I decorated cookies, laughing as flour dusted the counter and powdered sugar landed in his hair. He looked at me and said, "Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa will ever understand?" I shook my head. Some people don't understand, Evan. And that's not our fault. We can only take care of each other. He nodded thoughtfully and continued arranging the cookies, carefully spacing them out like little soldiers guarding our tiny kitchen kingdom. I watched him and felt a quiet pride I hadn't realized I could feel so fully. Not pride in gifts or achievements, but pride in his resilience, his patience, his ability to hold love even when it had been denied to him by others. The next morning, I finally turned my attention to Mark's automatic rent payment. It was still active, still set to pull funds without my involvement. With deliberate care, I canceled it. Then I checked every other automatic transfer that might give my parents leverage over me. Each one I disabled was a small act of liberation, a step toward creating a family and a life defined not by obligation or guilt, but by love, respect, and choice. Mark, predictably, called immediately, his voice rising with frustration and disbelief. "You're ruining everything. You're selfish." I didn't answer. Instead, I took a deep breath, watched Evan from across the room as he carefully arranged ornaments on the tree, and reminded myself of what mattered most. Our peace, our safety, our trust in each other. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of their expectations lift. No one was dictating my actions or my resources. No one was telling me how to define my family. For the first time, I could make decisions solely based on what was right for Evan and me, without fear of recrimination or guilt. That night, as we turned off the lights and curled under blankets on the couch, I realized that standing firm wasn't just about money or boundaries. It was about teaching Evan that love isn't conditional, that family isn't always blood, and that courage sometimes means saying no to the people who claim to care the most. And in that moment, as his head rested on my shoulder and he sighed contentedly, I understood something essential. The doors they slammed on Christmas morning couldn't take away what we had built. Our family was small, yes, but it was real. It was ours, and it would always be enough. The following weeks felt like a quiet awakening. Without my parents' constant interference and Mark's demands hanging over me, the tension that had always lurked in the background began to fade. I realized how much energy I had spent trying to meet their expectations, covering for their irresponsibility, and pretending that everything was fine. Now that energy could go into something real, into Evan, into our home, into the life we were building together. Evan seemed to notice it first. He laughed more freely, played without worrying about what anyone else might think, and stayed in his own world without glancing at the clock, waiting for someone to demand that he behave or conform. One afternoon, as he carefully stacked the blocks on our living room carpet, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, I think I like our Christmas better than theirs." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread in my chest that had nothing to do with holiday decorations or gifts. "I do too, Evan. I really do." The silence from my parents and Mark continued, and at first it was disorienting. I expected anger, messages, guilt trips, but there was nothing. Slowly, I realized the silence was a gift, a sign that our choice to step away had been the right one. No one had the power to dictate our family's happiness anymore. I spent evenings reflecting on everything that had happened. The slammed door, the rejected gifts, the hidden debts, and the years of emotional manipulation. I realized that their idea of family had never included Evan. He had never been protected, never been fully seen, and certainly never been prioritized. And that realization, painful as it was, also freed me. It freed me from the unspoken contracts, the guilt, the endless what-ifs. Evan and I created our own traditions. Some were small, redecorating the tree with handmade ornaments, baking cookies that never came out perfectly, reading stories by the Christmas lights. Others were more profound, like talking openly about feelings, naming disappointments, and celebrating the small victories that came from living true to ourselves. Every laugh, every shared moment, reinforced that our family was defined not by blood, but by love, respect, and choice. One evening, while putting Evan to bed, he looked at me with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think they'll ever apologize?" I shook my head gently. "Some people never do, Evan. And that's okay. We don't need their approval to know who we are, or how much we matter." He thought about it, then nodded and snuggled under the covers. "I'm glad it's just us," he whispered. And I was too. I began to notice subtle changes in myself as well. The anxiety that had always tightened my chest when I thought about my parents or Mark slowly loosened. The resentment that had built up over years of financial and emotional strain melted into something like calm certainty. I realized that the choice to step away, to set boundaries, to protect Evan and myself, wasn't just about one Christmas. It was about reclaiming every moment of our lives that had been overshadowed by manipulation. A week later, an old neighbor mentioned seeing my mother looking flustered, trying to manage Mark again. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I knew the story's ending already. I knew that my absence had removed their safety net, and they were struggling without it. That wasn't my burden anymore. Our peace was not negotiable. Christmas itself, the day had passed differently than any before. There were no elaborate parties, no frantic visits, no sense of obligation. Instead, there were pancakes shaped like snowmen, cocoa with extra marshmallows, and a marathon of our favorite movies. We laughed at jokes we told 100 times, rearranged ornaments on the tree, and simply existed in our own world, where love was enough and family was safe. By the end of the day, as Evan curled up next to me on the couch, I reflected on everything. The slammed door, the cold rejection, the manipulation, it had all led to a powerful realization. Family is not automatic. It is chosen. It is protected. It is nurtured. And the people who fail to see that, who manipulate and control rather than support, are not the family we need to honor. For the first time in years I felt free. Free from expectation. Free from guilt. Free from the quiet poison of obligation masquerading as love. Evan and I were safe together and whole. That was our family. That was our Christmas. That was our life. And in the quiet of our small, warmly lit living room, surrounded by homemade decorations and the soft hum of the heater, I realized I would choose this life, this family, over anyone else, every single time. No doors slammed, no manipulations, no expectations could ever take that from us. We had each other and that was enough. Always enough.